there is a session that raised a lot of questions. I think this could be the one. Okay, Antonia. Antonia, I said she will be always the first. You are not only being the first person that will hear the question, also in charge of this one. Okay, you can start. Open it.
Yeah, it was mute. Thank you all for these very, very interesting talks and presentations. I'm really intrigued by all of them, and it was a really nice finish with the movie. It kind of put everything together. And what intrigued me most, I think, about this panel is that all of you were kind of working on the topic of Germany being an immigration country, and with a special focus on Jews, of course. But so this question goes to Edna, even though I kind of know your topic. But I got hooked on what you said about Penina, that she described the Midrashah looking back as a hermetic cosmos, and when she moved out, and I'm very interested in this kind of transition from one space into another, and how she mirrors herself through the eyes of the others suddenly. You described how she suddenly felt different, but maybe you could say a bit more about this change and how that influenced her and how she judged that, because I didn't really get an idea of what was her evaluation of this process of being in a very closed space first that taught her a lot and educated her a lot, and where she could develop very much, and then suddenly I think she developed further by moving out of that space. But maybe could you explain that a little bit more? Thank you.
Well, I mean, as I mentioned, and as you said it just now, she developed when she developed further when she moved out. But as I said, it is actually, or as she described it, and as I also researched that the Midrashah was a seemingly hermetic cosmos. It was not a closed, really hermetic cosmos, because Midrashah students, they had a sort of split day, usually. They studied inside the Midrashah, and they went to school or they pursued a university study, most of them. Some were actually full-time students, which stayed the whole day at the Midrashah, but they were still in a certain contact with the so-called outside world. But I would not really define it as an outside world as clear-cut. I don't have a specific example right now. I just remember her telling me that while studying at the Midrashah, she and other students always coped with the problem of, okay, once they went to university, to the classes and courses, how do they deal with food and eating outside? So it was always an issue for them. Being very well aware of having a religious identity, religious Jewish identity, but not being able for themselves of eating in a canteen, for example. And coping with other students. Okay, so everyone brings his or her own sandwich and is not able to eat with the others, and dealing with questions that arise or remarks, more comfortable, less comfortable remarks, and the ability or the willingness to cope with it, with these remarks, or not coping with it. But I don't have a very specific example for your question. No.
So, want to ask? About what? Sorry?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Actually, I didn't investigate the children of these people, but thanks. But what I can say that first of all of those who I interviewed cultivated Russian-speaking school on Sundays, which would mean, and it surprised me very much because I, in comparison to Israel, I could not find no one beside one person in the children generation which would talk so good Russian as all of children of people in Germany who I interviewed. So it was for me very interesting to see that they stick to Russian-speaking identity. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say Russian identity because they don't feel themselves really as Russian. That this cultivation of Russian language and certain Russian cultural practices is there. This is one side. The other is that this generation, I would speculate and claim that they are still looking for their identity, and it is also for this generation very relevant to find their we collective. It's not taken for granted, and also, although they speak without accent German, it is also about looking for their Jewish roots or identity, which is, we talked about it yesterday, which is not so stigmatized in comparison to their parents, which connect mostly negative things with Jewishness and discrimination experiences. You are right, they don't they would not buy probably especially, or not especially go to Russian food store and buy chocolate of Red October, because it is not about Red October and not about the same biological taste, but it is about stories and social status which their parents had at the subway. They bought it from the work, they went at home and had to find it and to stay in the line and so on. So this story is not there, and I'm convinced that people buy rather a story than the taste. So I would not say it's absurd. It has its logic for this generation, but not for their children. No, it is strange for them, but it is strange, of course. But I would say there is a conflict of loyalties, because on the one side you are obliged to be loyal to your parents, which means they are significant others for you, and at the same time they are highly educated, and they are without any work and supported through the social welfare. So they are significant others, and they speak literary Russian and perceive themselves as a kind of elite, cultural elite, and at the same time they are perceived and they really on the bottom of the social hierarchy outside. And children are obliged or exposed to the necessity to translate for them or to write letters for them, to be their parents in a way, to go with them to the school and to translate or to social work and so on. And this kind of conflict of loyalty is very, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not sure if it's a traumatizing experience, but it is obvious, it can be hardly normalized, like it is not really normal situation. So I saw a kind of examples in which children had been excluded in the school as not Germans, as others, whatever, Ausländer, foreigners, or Jews, or Russian speakers, or Homo Sovieticus, whatever, and yeah, kind of. And then they went at home and tried to play out their German identity at home. I had a couple of such examples. Like you don't know your way around. You are Russian. You have to change. Actually, it is like, and then like to teach their parents about like how it is really is, which doesn't have to be this, like. But it was not, it was just a couple of examples. It would be a very interesting topic to investigate.
It's very interesting. Homesickness, that's a very personal thing. Trying to think like common threads. There's simple things like watching TV that you have at home, reading the newspaper. It's 2013, so everything's online. So you can watch your TV online, you can read your newspapers online now, but you don't physically have it, I guess. Food comes up a lot, I would say, which is fair. I mean, the cuisines are very, very different. I think being away from family comes up a bit as well. Seems with a lot of people who interview, not a lot of family comes to visit them in Berlin. They're sort of expected to go home to visit. So, I mean, overall, it's not an issue I necessarily broach often, but it does come up. And as Nurit mentioned, having their groups, you get a lot of hummus, you get a lot of, pita in the Israeli style. So a lot of things are brought to Berlin to help homesickness stay at the absolute minimum. And then lastly, and probably what everyone says, is the weather. I mean, it was minus 15 for a good week last month, and it just gets unbearable, and I can't imagine coming from a warm climate to that. So yeah, I'd say that sums it up.
Okay.
it's it's hard to pinpoint because there are a lot of individuals living in Berlin. It's different to them what Israeliness is. I think if you ask Nurit, her Israeliness comes from the fact that she hasn't given up her identity in any way. I mean, she still has a largely Israeli diet. I mean, she has an equal amount of Israeli friends and German friends. And, she very much relishes her Israeli life in Berlin. You talk to some other people, like for instance, an artist I knew who burned his passport. He's Jewish first and Israeli never because he's just given it up. And his resignation is it's sort of depressing, but he's still Israeli though. He still likes to go to the Israeli cafes, and he still does similar things. It's just he's in a dark place with it. Those are extremes. I'd say the average person being Israeli in Berlin is the same as being an American in Berlin. I mean, you can't deny who you are and where your roots are. I mean, my accent gives me away instantly. Their accent gives them away. I mean, it's the way I dress, the way they dress. I mean, you can stand on a street in Amsterdam or Paris and Berlin, and you can always spot an American, And it's hard for me to say what it is to be an Israeli because I'm not. And I have very, very little parallel with this community in Israel. I mean, it's new to me, and a lot of what I've learned about Israel has been through the filter of Berlin. And I have to say, and when it comes to Judaism, I grew up in a fairly distanced from any Judaism part of the country in Western Washington. And a lot of what I learned of Judaism, I learned through television. I learned it through Joel Fleischman on Northern Exposure and Krusty the Clown on The Simpsons, and I say schlep and schmear because Yiddish was a huge influence on our culture and our vernacular. My wife is English and she's never even heard those words, and I use them commonly. And for me, I mean, when I found out I had Jewish history in my lineage, it obviously piqued my curiosity, but it's so far detached. I mean, 1790 is just, it's really too far for any concrete or mental attachment. So to be Israeli, to be Jewish, it depends on who you talk to. I mean, I think, as Tomar stated, it's holding on to who you are and what you are and where you're from and not letting it go. And I think that's what's important. And I think that's what's unique about the specific immigrant situation of Israelis in Berlin is they hold on to their identity. They don't let it go. For the most part, of course. There are obviously exceptions to everything. So does that answer your sort of?
Thank you. Does it work? Yeah. First of all, I also want to thank all the participants of this panel for really providing really interesting insights into very puzzling phenomenons like young Russians adopting a religious Jewish identity, or Israelis in Berlin constructing an equally puzzling Israeli Jewish identity, or Jewish immigrants from Russia trying to identify with Russian through Russian or trying to construct an identity through Russian food. But my question is, all three presentations, would you say that what lies maybe at the core of these three presentations is that they throw a light at German mentality, this still exclusionary mentality in German that seems to me somehow prevailing in Germany, and that's why you are forced to create some identity through religion, through food, through whatever. Is that an impression, or is that totally, am I totally off with this assumption? Anybody?
I can just start 2 sentences and maybe it's too strong, but as you formulated it, that I think it's not. First of all, it's about European countries, and then about Germany as countries which are not in the history, were not migration countries. And in German language, you hear it very, very strongly through very common sense question. You know, the first question which you hear in the communication is, wo sind Sie eigentlich her? Where are you from? And I consciously told it in German because it has language is a very subjective thing. We are all of us very differently sensibilized for language, but I would claim that it has a little bit different touch in comparison to the same question in English, where are you from? Because this, as a first question, banal, naive question in the communication, wo sind Sie eigentlich her? Or, er oder sie sind nicht von hier. It's a very, very rooted question, which makes a kind of contextualization for every communication and collective of we and there, and they, we and others, which is never badly meant. Nobody means something, to discriminate you with this question. People would mostly, they would say, I'm just wondering, I just want to know, because they think that it is about them. They want to know. So they put question, but they don't understand that they themselves, and I mean dominant groups, have been never asked themselves. So some people are exposed to the necessity to have, and usually it's visible others. I don't like this word visible because it depends on the perspective, but those who are categorized as visible others are exposed to the necessity permanently to deal with this question. Even if they had been born in this country and know only German language, but look not like stereotyped Germans, only this question already, in my opinion, makes a kind of exclusion symbolically. This is the first thing. And the second thing, in comparison, in my research about Russian speakers, Russian-speaking Jews between Israel and Germany, in this comparison, I was surprised also to see that Russian-speaking enclave, I mean Russian food stores, are very visible, had been very visible at that time in Israel, and were hidden in Germany. So you could not see in really big letters in Russian language or big advertisements about in Russian language, which would be absolutely legitimate to make here, as I know is from here. So this kind of alienation which people experience, I think it plays a very important role in psychological thing, because economically speaking, in comparison, even if they are supported through the social welfare, their standard of living is relatively in comparison to the academics, Russian speakers, here is much better than the average. But this kind of alienation and everyday coping with the question, okay, I'm doctor in medicine, but I'm on the social welfare, and am I still doctor? And I'm a winner and Jewish, but everybody in my community says, yeah, no, you're not really Jewish because you don't know anything about Judaism. But I was discriminated in Russia, and I had anti-Semitism experience. But it's not enough to be Jewish. So I thought it is enough. So it's really a necessity to coping with multiple stigmatized identities, which is very painful, I think. And in Israel, you have this very strong supportive narrative of a collective which is behind you, and if somebody says tells you you can go home, you can say, yeah, you can also go home, I'm already in home. In Germany, you cannot, this sentence, it's not possible to formulate because you are in multiple sense, you are minority, and you come from minority to double and triple minority to Germany. So I think it's very big challenge for people, and they do need very different kinds of supportive niches, which are not really still exist.
Well,
Yeah.
if anybody is...
I don't really know where to begin. No, like I said again, in Berlin, it's hard for me to really say because I'm an observer. I'm not experiencing it myself. And I think and I have to draw a line there as well. I've experienced anti-Semitism in Berlin myself, and I'm not even Jewish. I don't even know. When I was walking around the streets of Jerusalem, everyone started talking to me in Russian. Like, it's sort of, you never know what's gonna happen. But like I said, for me, it's hard for me to equate anything because I'm on the outside looking in, and I can't speak for the people I'm observing. So, but I like to keep it that way because I don't want to put words in people's mouths and make assumptions in this situation.
Well, I would say for those people who I do research on, the young generation, they don't feel excluded from the German society. I would rather say two things. They have a multiple identity. They have fragmented identities of being Jewish, feeling German, and also Russian or Ukrainian or whatever. Former Soviet Union identity. And they cope with these threefold, or some even migrated to the United States and then back to Germany from the former Soviet Union. They cope with these multiple identities quite well. So this is the one thing. And what I rather heard from my protagonists was that some of them felt excluded from the Jewish communities. And I talk about those who are not defined as halachically Jewish. I have one specific person whom I interviewed very long. He has a very interesting biography. He is not halachically Jewish, so his father is Jewish. And he's sort of, due to that, he's not accepted within the Jewish community. But he feels himself Jewish, totally. He finds himself Jewish. He lives a traditional Jewish life, a Masorti Jewish life. He personally does not have a problem with that. And he goes to the traditional, to the Masorti Jewish congregation, to the synagogue in Berlin. But coping with that from the perception of others, he finds it hard, for example, to find a Jewish partner. So this is more restriction or a feeling of being excluded from within Jewish communities, as far as I can talk for my protagonists.
Thank you very much for these enlightening answers. Thanks.
Okay, we have to bear in mind that the migration process is a process of 3 generations at least. So we have to deal with these 3 generations, we have to follow them, we have to learn what happened to them. Only then we can understand if the integration was successful and which integration has emerged after this process. And the second thing that we should remember is that the process of migration is not happening only to the immigrants themselves, also to the main society. So we have to follow and to learn, to study what happens to them. But because also for them it's a process. It's not, okay, you come, I integrated you to the society. It takes time. The questions that you have, it's maybe part of the process of understanding what happened to their society now, and something will emerge. I don't know what will happen in Germany, but this is part of the process. And thank you very much. Thank you, my friends. And we'll meet here again at 1:30. Thank you.